Lee Marvin hit the ground the second the explosion went off, and by the time the smoke cleared, 40 people on set could see he wasn't acting anymore. Wait, because what John Wayne whispered to him in that trailer 15 minutes later would stay secret for 20 years, and when it finally came out, it explained why Lee Marvin never spoke about the war again. It's June 1965. Arizona desert, 107 degrees in the shade. They're shooting a World War II combat sequence for a film nobody remembers now. But back then, it's supposed to be the biggest war picture since The Longest Day. Lee Marvin's playing a sergeant, John Wayne's the colonel, and the whole production's built around one massive battle scene that's been in pre-production for 8 months. The studio's got genuine military consultants, real Sherman tanks on loan, and enough pyrotechnics to level a small town. It's the kind of shoot where everyone knows something could go wrong, but nobody says it out loud because saying it might make it real. The desert smells like heated dirt and diesel fuel from the trucks. The costume department's been working overtime to make sure every uniform looks authentically worn, torn here, mud-stained there, blood capsules ready in the breast pockets for the hit reactions. The sound of the generators hums under everything, a constant low drone that most people stop hearing after the first hour, but it never really goes away. Camera assistants are checking lens filters for dust every 10 minutes because the wind kicks up fine particles that get into everything, into the equipment, into people's lungs, into the water bottles that taste like warm plastic by mid-morning. Lee shows up that morning, looking like he didn't sleep. One of the makeup artists mentions it to her assistant, says his eyes have that flat look, like he's seeing through you instead of at you. She's worked with him before, and she's never seen that expression. The assistant shrugs it off. It's a war movie. Maybe he's getting into character. The makeup artist, her name's Barbara, been in the business since 1947. She'll remember this morning for the rest of her life. She'll tell people that when she was powdering Lee's face to cut the shine for the cameras, his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping under his cheekbone. She asked him if he was all right, and he said fine, in a way that meant don't ask again. She didn't, but she mentioned it to the script supervisor, a woman named Joan, who'd worked 3 films with Lee before. Joan made a note of it in her logbook. LM seems off. Check in later. They run through the blocking 3 times. Lee's supposed to lead his squad across open ground while mortars go off around them, dive behind a knocked-out Jeep, then give the signal for covering fire. Simple enough on paper. But the explosives teams buried 16 charges in the dirt, timed to detonate in sequence, and when they go off, they're going to throw debris 15 feet in the air. The coordinator walks Lee through it twice more, shows him exactly where each charge is planted, tells him where to look and where not to look. The explosives coordinator, veteran of a dozen war films, knows his job cold. He's standing with his handheld detonator, running through the timing one more time with his assistant. Charge 5 is the big one, he's saying. That's the mortar hit that's supposed to make them think the whole position's compromised. It's going to be loud, louder than the others. I need everyone wearing ear protection, except the principals. He looks at Lee. You're gonna feel that one in your chest when it goes. Lee nods, doesn't say anything. John Wayne's watching from behind the camera. He's not in this particular shot, but he's there anyway because that's how he works. If his name's on the picture, he sees everything. He's standing next to the director, a man named Frank Holloway, who's made exactly 2 war films before this one and thinks he knows how to handle actors. John's watching Lee, and something about the way Lee's moving doesn't sit right. Lee's a professional, one of the best stunt guys who ever transitioned into real acting, and he doesn't hesitate. But today he's hesitating. There's a tell. John sees it during the second blocking rehearsal. Lee's supposed to crouch run across open ground, but instead of keeping his eyes forward like you would in a real combat situation, his eyes keep flicking down to where the charges are buried. Not the kind of thing an audience would catch, but John catches it. And the thing is, Lee knows where those charges are. They walked him through it. So why is he checking? Like he's making sure of something, or afraid of something. A gaffer standing 12 feet away from John will later tell his wife that he saw John's hand tighten on the back of the director's chair, just for a second, like he was about to say something, and then decided against it. "He good to go?" John asks Holloway. "He's fine," Holloway says. Marvin doesn't rattle. John doesn't say anything else, but he keeps watching. His eyes don't leave Lee. Even when Holloway starts talking about camera angles and coverage, they roll camera. First assistant calls action. Lee starts his run. The first charge goes off right on cue, throwing dirt 10 feet to Lee's left. He keeps moving. The sound echoes off the surrounding rocks, comes back at them from 3 directions. Second charge. A cloud of dust rises, catches the sun, turns golden brown. Third, Lee's rhythm is good. He's hitting his marks. He's supposed to dive after the fourth one. The fourth charge blows, and Lee goes down exactly where he's supposed to, behind the Jeep, and for 2 seconds it looks perfect. Then the fifth charge detonates. It's 40 feet away from Lee, well outside the safety radius, but something about the sound or the smell or the way the shockwave hits the air makes Lee's body lock up. He doesn't move. He's supposed to pop up, signal his men, keep the scene going. Instead, he stays down. The sixth charge blows. The seventh. Lee's still behind that Jeep, and from where John's standing, he can see Lee's hands starting to shake. The script supervisor later describes it like this. 1 second, he was an actor doing a scene. The next second, he was just gone, like someone had pulled him out of his body and left the shell behind. One of the extras, a kid from UCLA doing this for beer money and a credit, he'll tell his film studies professor a month later that he saw Lee's face right before he went down behind the Jeep, and it wasn't the face of a man acting scared. It was the face of a man who was actually back in the war. His eyes went somewhere else, the kid says, and I don't think he knew where he was anymore. "Cut," Holloway yells. "Cut, cut, somebody get Marvin up." 2 grips jog over. They reach Lee and stop. One of them waves back at the camera. He's not responding. John's already moving. Look, this is where most people who tell this story get it wrong. They say John ran over there like some hero out of his own movies, pulled Lee up by the collar, snapped him out of it with a hard word and a slap on the back. That's not what happened. What happened is John Wayne walked across that set at normal speed, didn't rush, didn't make a big show, and when he got to Lee Marvin, he knelt down in the dirt next to him and didn't say a word for 30 seconds. Lee's sitting with his back against the Jeep, knees pulled up, hands locked on his head. His eyes are open, but they're not seeing the desert or the crew or John. They're seeing something else. The 2 grips are standing there looking uncomfortable, not sure if they should leave or help or what. Holloway's yelling something from behind the camera about schedules and costs and how they can't afford to lose the light. John finally speaks, and his voice is so low that the grips can't hear it. "Lee, you with me?" Lee doesn't answer. "Look at me," John says. Still quiet. "Right here, not there. Here." Lee's eyes move, slowly, like it's taking every ounce of strength he's got. They fix on John's face. "You're in Arizona," John says. "It's 1965. You're not there anymore." And that's when Lee starts shaking harder. His whole body, one of the grips takes a step forward, like he's going to grab him, and John holds up one hand without looking away from Lee. "Back off." The grip stops. Holloway's coming over now, his face red from the heat and the frustration. What the hell's going on? We've got 40 extras standing around burning daylight. John doesn't turn around. "Get back behind that camera, Frank." "Wayne, I'm directing this picture." I said get back. There's something in John's voice that makes Holloway stop mid-sentence. It's not loud, it's not angry, it's just absolute. Holloway looks at John's back, looks at Lee, looks at the crew watching them. and then he turns around and walks back to the camera without another word. John leans in closer to Lee. "Can you stand?" Lee nods. "Barely." "All right, we're going to your trailer. Just you and me." He helps Lee up. Lee's legs are unsteady, and he's got one hand on John's shoulder just to stay upright. They start walking toward the trailers, which are parked 200 yards from the set. The entire crew's watching. Nobody's talking. The makeup artist who noticed Lee's eyes that morning is standing next to the craft services table, and later she'll tell people she's never seen 40 people stay that quiet for that long. Notice something here. John doesn't explain anything to anyone. Doesn't tell Holloway they'll be back in 10 minutes. Doesn't signal to anyone that this is temporary. He just walks Lee off that set in front of the whole production, and for all anyone knows, Lee Marvin's career just ended. They get to Lee's trailer. John opens the door, helps Lee inside, closes the door behind them. 15 minutes pass. Out on the set, Holloway's pacing. The assistant director's asking if they should set up for a different shot. The explosives coordinator's asking if they need to reset the charges. The extras are sitting in the shade, wondering if they're getting paid for a full day, or if this counts as a cancellation. Nobody knows what to do, because nobody knows what's happening in that trailer. Then the door opens. John comes out first. His face doesn't show anything. Lee comes out second, and his eyes are red, but his hands aren't shaking anymore. They walk back to the set together. Lee goes straight to Holloway. "I'm ready," Lee says. "Let's do it." Holloway looks at John. John nods once. They reset the scene. Same blocking, same 16 charges. They roll camera again. This time, when the explosions start, Lee moves through them like he's done it 1,000 times, hits his mark, delivers his line, finishes the scene in one take. When Holloway calls cut, the crew applauds, which almost never happens on a serious set, but this time it feels right. Lee walks off camera and doesn't look at anyone. John follows him. Remember this. That night, after they wrapped for the day, John Wayne and Lee Marvin sat in John's trailer for 3 hours. Nobody else was invited. The assistant director knocked once to ask about call times for the next day, and John told him through the door to figure it out himself. What did they talk about for 3 hours? Nobody knows. Lee never said. John never said. But when Lee left that trailer, he looked different. Not better. Exactly. Different. Like something heavy had been put down. The shoot continued for another 4 weeks. Lee finished his part without another incident, but people noticed he didn't talk much between takes, and he never watched the playback when they showed dailies. One of the grips tried to ask him once how he managed to pull it together after the breakdown, and Lee just looked at him and said, "I didn't, Wayne did." The grip asked what that meant. Lee didn't answer. 20 years go by. The film gets released and promptly forgotten. John Wayne makes 30 more pictures. Lee Marvin becomes one of the most respected actors of his generation, wins an Oscar, works steadily until the mid-80s. But in all those years, in hundreds of interviews, nobody ever gets Lee to talk about the war. He talks about movies, about directors, about stunts, about working with Brando and Bogart and Newman. But if someone asks about his service in World War II, and people ask, because he was at Saipan, took shrapnel in the ass, spent a year in naval hospitals, he deflects, changes the subject, walks away if they push. In 1987, Lee's dying. Complications from surgery. Details don't matter. But he knows he's not getting out of that hospital bed. His wife's there. His kids are there. They're talking about old times, about memories, about the work he did, and the people he knew. And Lee brings up John Wayne. He tells them about that day in Arizona. The explosion, the breakdown, the trailer. He tells them what John said to him during those 15 minutes. Here's what came out, secondhand, from Lee's wife in an interview she gave in 1991. John Wayne sat Lee down in that trailer and said, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it." Lee tried to interrupt, tried to say something about John's exemption, about the USO tours, about all the war films John made that helped morale. John cut him off. "I wasn't there," John said again. "You were, and every time I put on a uniform for a camera, I'm playing a man like you. I'm not that man. I'm playing him. You lived it, and I can't imagine what that costs." He paused. "So here's what I'm saying. You don't owe anybody an explanation. You don't owe them a performance. You don't owe them your pain. If you need to walk off this set right now and never come back, I'll make sure you get paid and nobody says a word against you. But if you want to stay, if you want to finish this, I'll be right next to you. Not because I understand. I don't. But because you shouldn't have to do it alone." Then he said something else. Lee's wife couldn't remember the exact words, but the gist of it was the war's over. "Lee, you won. You're allowed to put it down." Lee sat with that for a long time. Then he asked John how he was supposed to put it down when it kept coming back. And John said, "You don't put it down once. You put it down every day. Today, you put it down with me. Tomorrow, maybe you put it down with someone else, but you don't carry it alone anymore. Stop for a second and understand what's happening there." John Wayne, a man whose entire image is built on toughness, on self-reliance, on never showing weakness, is telling a genuine war hero that it's okay to need help. He's giving Lee permission to be human in a way that Hollywood and the culture and Lee's own self-image have never allowed. When Lee finished telling his family that story, his wife asked him why he never shared it before, why he kept it secret for 20 years. Lee said, "Because he wasn't asking for credit. He was just trying to help, and I didn't want to turn it into something people could use." 3 days later, Lee Marvin died. At his funeral, they read a letter John Wayne had written to him in 1979, after John's own cancer diagnosis. In it, John mentioned that day in the desert when you taught me more about courage than any script ever could. Lee's family didn't know what that meant until they remembered the story Lee had told them in the hospital. Here's the part that breaks most people after Lee died. A crew member from that 1965 film came forward with something he'd been carrying for decades. He was one of the grips who walked over to Lee after the explosion. He didn't hear what John said to Lee that day, but he was close enough to see Lee's face, and he said that when John told Lee he could walk away, Lee's expression changed from panic to something else. Not relief, gratitude. He looked at John Wayne like he'd just been given permission to be alive, the grip said. That's the secret that took 20 years to surface. Not some dramatic speech, not some tough guy pep talk, just one man telling another man, you don't have to be strong all the time. I'll stand with you. And here's the loop we've been building toward. Remember that day in Arizona when Holloway tried to push through, when he said they couldn't afford to lose the light? That wasn't just about schedules. Holloway knew Lee's contract had a clause that said he could be replaced if he couldn't perform due to mental unfitness. He was already talking to the producers about bringing in a replacement. John Wayne found out that night. The next morning, John went to the producers and told them if Lee goes, he goes. The studio couldn't afford to lose John Wayne. Lee stayed. Holloway didn't speak to John for the rest of the shoot, but that didn't matter. Lee finished the film. The countdown we've been tracking, it started that morning when Lee woke up with that flat look in his eyes. It was heading toward a point where Lee's career would have ended, where a breakdown would have been used against him, where the system would have crushed a war hero for having the audacity to show he was human. John Wayne saw it coming and stepped in front of it. Not with fists, not with guns, not with the tough guy act, with quiet, private compassion. Look at what that means for a second. John Wayne, the man who built an entire career on never backing down, on always being the strongest in the room, chose to show Lee Marvin, and through Lee's story, all of us, that real strength is knowing when someone needs help and giving it without asking for anything back. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. The story gets one more turn before we close. In 1999, when they were restoring old studio records, someone found John Wayne's personal notes from that production. In his handwriting, on the date of Lee's breakdown, he'd written, "Saw a man break today. Reminded me we're all one explosion away from remembering what we've survived. Helped where I could. Hope it mattered. Hope it mattered." 20 years of Lee Marvin's career, built on the foundation of those 15 minutes in a trailer. A man who'd survived actual war, who'd bled on a real battlefield, given the space to survive a different kind of battle by another man who understood that heroism isn't always loud. That's the story. That's what Lee Marvin took to his grave, and only shared when he knew he was leaving. That's what John Wayne never told anyone, because he didn't do it for the story. He did it because it was right. And if you want to know what happened when Lee Marvin walked into John Wayne's funeral in 1979 and stood in the back without saying a word, leaving before anyone could ask him to speak, tell me in the comments.